I never imagined humiliation could come dressed in silk and poured into champagne glasses. There I was, sitting in the third row of my younger sister's wedding, wearing the only formal dress I owned, doing my best to fade into a crowd of people who all seemed too polished, too flawless. Beside me, my son Luca swung his little legs beneath the table, looking sharp in a suit I'd managed to buy only by stretching 2 paychecks. He sat tall and proud, believing this day might finally make us feel part of the family again. Maybe deep down, I wished for the same. Vivian, my sister, floated through the celebration like a star on screen. She had always been that way, beautiful, magnetic, adored by everyone, especially our mother. She collected the praise. I collected the comparisons. She shined in the spotlight. I learned to survive in the shadows. Still I showed up. I smiled. I clapped when they kissed. I forced steadiness into my voice when people asked, "You're the older sister? You don't look like you already have an 8-year-old." Then came the speeches. The groom's best friend went first, some light-hearted stories, a few chuckles from the crowd. Next was Vivian. I expected warmth, something sentimental about love, maybe even a nod to our childhood. I even raised my glass ready. I should have known better. She lifted her crystal flute, her face glowing under the lights. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she began. "It means so much to have you all with us. And of course, I want to say something about my big sister." I turned to Luca and smiled. His eyes sparkled with anticipation. For a moment, I believed she might actually say something kind. But Vivian continued. "Lara's always been such a role model. A single mom, strong, independent, and clearly unwanted by anyone else." The room erupted in laughter. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought I had misheard, but no, she kept smiling, as though she had just delivered the wittiest line of the night. Some guests shifted awkwardly, but most laughed harder, glasses clinking as if it were all harmless fun. I didn't know where to look. My pulse thundered in my ears. Luca tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Mama, why did she say that about you?" Before I could form words, my mother chimed in from across the room, loud and sharp. "She's a used product, but hey, she still looks good for her age." More laughter. Louder. Crueler. It was the kind of laughter that cuts like glass. The kind that tells you you're no longer seen as a guest, or even family, but as a joke, as pity, as shame. I froze. My face burned. But I refused to cry. Not in front of my son. Not in front of them. My fists tightened around the napkin under the table, clutching it like a lifeline. I scanned the room, desperate for someone to meet my eyes, to offer even a flicker of compassion. But my grandfather kept his gaze fixed on his plate. My cousin smirked at her phone. Even my uncle, who once told me I reminded him of my late father, didn't look up. Luca's brows knitted together, his little face etched with confusion and hurt. That was what shattered me. Not their words. Not the laughter. Not the humiliation. But that my son sat there, watching it all, trying to understand why the woman who kissed his scraped knees and stayed up late helping with his homework was being mocked by her own family. I wanted to bolt. To grab Luca's hand and walk out, never looking back. But something inside me paused. I wanted to speak. I wanted to stand and tell them they had no idea what I'd endured, what I had carried. But my throat was dry, my legs trembling beneath the table. Then, before I could move, a chair scraped against the floor. Callum, the groom, Vivian's flawless, polished fiancé, rose slowly to his feet. His face was set, not amused. He didn't glance at Vivian. He didn't look at the guests. His eyes locked straight on me, and something in that look made the whole room fall silent. In that moment, I knew something was about to change. Not a rescue. Not an argument. A reckoning. People think being the older sibling means you set the example, that you're the one others look up to. But in my family, I wasn't a role model. I was a warning. My name is Lara. I'm 34 years old, a single mother, and the black sheep of my family. I live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town with my son, Luca. He's 8 years old. The greatest blessing of my life and the only reason I ever stepped back into spaces that once made me feel insignificant. I juggle 2 jobs. Mornings at a neighborhood cafe, and evenings working the front desk of a small hotel. My life isn't fancy, but it's mine. On Saturdays, I make Luca pancakes. I know how to stitch up the holes in his jeans. And he calls me his superhero. That's all the fuel I need to keep going. But in my family's eyes, being a single mother meant I had already failed. My mom, Judith, reminded me of it at every holiday table. She worshipped appearances. That's why she told everyone that Vivian's wedding was a chance to restore the family name. Vivian is 5 years younger than me. Beautiful, accomplished, spoiled with every advantage, and always able to make it seem as though she earned it all. She's the golden child. Judith dotes on her endlessly. If Vivian sneezed, our mother would hand her a silk handkerchief. If I got sick, she told me to take vitamins and stop being dramatic. When I became pregnant with Luca, everything shifted. I was 25, swept up in love with a man who promised forever. By my 5th month he vanished, no note, no explanation. Just gone. My family didn't ask questions. They didn't offer comfort. All they gave me was silence, judgment, and I told you as. But I had Luca. The moment I held him, every cruel word they'd ever spoken faded into background noise. Still, deep inside, I wished they'd someday see me, not just as a single mom, but as someone worthy of love. Maybe that's why, when Vivian's wedding invitation arrived, I accepted. Even though I wasn't part of the bridal party. Even though my name was misspelled on the RSVP card. Even though I had to rent a dress and style my own hair in the bathroom mirror, while Luca practiced grinning in his tiny tie. I convinced myself this was closure. That maybe, just maybe, it was my family's quiet way of offering an olive branch. The venue was breathtaking. White roses everywhere, golden tableware gleaming, and a string quartet playing softly in the background. Vivian looked like she'd stepped off the pages of a bridal magazine. Glowing, sparkling, soaking up every compliment and camera flash. When she walked past me, her smile faltered. "You made it," she said, as if she hadn't expected me to come. She glanced at Luca and added, "He's getting big." No hug. No warmth. Just polite chatter before she returned to her spotlight. Judith didn't even look at me. She strolled right past as if I were one of the servers. But Luca was beaming. He thought the chandelier looked like a spaceship. He whispered that Vivian looked like a princess. And seeing his joy just being there, I chose to stay for the reception. Despite the heavy ache of not belonging pressing into my chest. Our place was table 9, tucked near the restrooms. Fitting, I thought with a laugh to myself. We ate our salads. I wiped mousse from Luca's tie. I avoided my mother's gaze and tried not to hear my name whispered among the clinking of champagne glasses. Then came the speeches. That's when I realized the evening wasn't about family healing or forgiveness. It was another stage for Vivian to sparkle. And soon, I would become her punchline. The speeches began the usual way, sweet, polished, a little too rehearsed. Vivian rose with perfect posture, holding a champagne flute in her freshly manicured hand. Her dress shimmered beneath the reception lights, and the room fell silent in anticipation. She smiled, pausing just long enough for every eye to settle on her. "I want to thank all of you for being here," she began. "This is the happiest day of my life, and I'm surrounded by the people who mean everything to me." From the back table, I tried to believe I was included in that sentence. Luca leaned forward on his chair, legs swinging, utterly captivated by the fairy tale unfolding before him. Vivian went on, speaking sweetly about her new husband, Callum, about love, timing, and destiny. For a moment I relaxed. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't turn cruel. But then she shifted. "And of course," she said with a sly smile, "I want to give a special thanks to my big sister. You've always been such a strong example." The spotlight turned. I felt eyes swing toward me. I straightened in my seat, forcing a polite smile. Vivian's voice stayed light, but her words carried an edge. "She's the strongest woman I've ever known. She raised her child all on her own. No husband, no partner, just her, and the occasional help from someone kind enough to babysit." The room broke into laughter. My stomach twisted. "But seriously," she went on, "it's amazing what she's done. A single mother, unwanted by anyone, and yet she still shows up." More laughter erupted. Loud, raw, and merciless. I felt the air drain from my lungs. Heat rose in my cheeks as my hands froze around the napkin in my lap. I turned to Luca. His brows were furrowed, eyes darting across the room, trying to make sense of why people were laughing at his mom. And then came the blow that cut deepest. My mother, Judith, laughed louder than the rest. She leaned toward the people at her table and, just loud enough to Carrie, added, "She's second-hand, but she still shines up decently." The laughter swelled again, sharper this time, mockery disguised as humor. My vision blurred. It was like being struck, only no one laid a hand on me. The room around me laughed freely, as though it were perfectly fine to ridicule a woman who had poured nearly 10 years into raising her child with love and resilience. As if being alone somehow made me less. I glanced down at Luca. His smile had vanished. He pressed close to me and whispered, "Why did she say that? What does it mean?" I wanted to answer, but nothing came. I couldn't protect him from this moment, from the way our own family saw me. That kind of pain never hides. My heart pounded. My eyes scanned the room for an exit, for someone who might intervene, who might say enough. But no one did. A few looked uneasy, but their eyes dropped quickly to their drinks, their plates, their phones. Even Grandpa Norman, who used to call me his little lion when I was a child, wouldn't meet my gaze. He was sitting there, but not with me. And in that moment, I was alone again. If it had only been me, I could have endured it. I've been swallowing that kind of treatment for years. I could have forced a smile, taken Luca's hand, and walked out with my head high. But the look in his eyes, the confusion, the hurt, watching him try to understand why the same people clapping and celebrating a moment ago were now laughing at his mother, that shattered something inside me. I rose to my feet, not because I had words ready, not because I wanted to cause a scene. I just needed to leave, to breathe, to escape the suffocating shame pressing in from every side. My chair scraped back as my trembling hands pushed me upright. Then at the head table, another chair scraped the floor. Callum, the groom, stood. His face was pale, jaw locked tight. Without hesitation, he took the microphone from Vivian. The room fell into silence. The shift was immediate, like the temperature had dropped. No laughter, no murmurs, only stillness. And I knew, whatever was coming, it wasn't part of the plan. Callum stood with one hand braced against the table, the other gripping the microphone. His eyes didn't waver. They weren't on Vivian, not on Judith, not on the crowd that had just mocked me. They were on me. For a fleeting second, I thought he might turn it into another joke, smooth things over, charm his way through the tension. That's what my family always does. Sweep it under the rug, disguise cruelty as humor, call it tradition. But that's not what he chose. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh. His expression was locked in something I couldn't quite decipher. Maybe anger, though it seemed heavier than that. A blend of disappointment and disbelief. Before he could say a word, I slid my chair back and reached for Luca's hand. I was ready to walk away with dignity, without tears, without letting them see me break. I'd managed it before. I could do it again. But just as I turned, Callum's voice cut through the air. Low, steady, and calm. "Era, don't leave." I froze. Every head turned toward him. Murmurs swept across the room like dry leaves stirred by the wind. Vivian stiffened. Judith's eyes narrowed. The DJ reached for the volume, but stopped when Callum lifted his hand. He was looking only at me. "I can't pretend I'm fine with what just happened," he said. "I won't stand here and let cruelty be passed off as humor." The entire room held its breath. Callum stepped away from the head table, moving forward slowly, each stride heavy with purpose, as though pressing against the weight of the moment. He stopped at our table, me, Luca, and the abandoned salad plates, and looked directly at the guests. For the past year, I've heard so much about family, about appearances, tradition, loyalty. But what I just witnessed wasn't family. That was mockery, disguised as celebration. Uneasy shifting rippled through the crowd. Some guests glanced at Judith. Others kept their eyes down, staring into their drinks. He turned to Vivian. "You made fun of your sister for being a single mother, for raising a child on her own. You laughed. Worse, you forced her son to sit there and watch it happen." Vivian opened her mouth, but no words came. Callum didn't wait. She didn't ask for this. But she came anyway. She smiled. She sat quietly at the back. She brought her son to be part of your day. And you turned her presence into a punchline. I had never seen Vivian appear so small until that moment. Then he looked back at everyone else. Era didn't stand up here to defend herself. She didn't ask for pity. She's never needed a spotlight. But I won't stay silent. Because if I'm about to join a family that calls cruelty tradition and shame entertainment, then I need to think carefully about the kind of man I want to become. A shocked gasp spread through the room. A woman nearby whispered, "Is this real?" Someone dropped a fork. Lucas stared up at me with wide eyes. I had no idea how to respond. I had come expecting to endure the evening, not to be defended. Certainly not like this, not before everyone. Callum glanced down at my son and gave him the gentlest nod. "Your mom is the strongest person in this room. Don't ever forget that." Then he faced the guests one last time. "I think I've seen enough." He placed the microphone down, walked past Vivian without a second glance, and headed for the door. I stood frozen, Luca's hand still in mine. The music never resumed. No one moved. The entire room felt drained of air, like all the light had gone out at once. The fairy tale had shattered. But for the first time in years, I wasn't the one left broken. When Callum walked out of the reception hall, the atmosphere collapsed. There was no applause, no cheers. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner, and the clink of a spoon against glass. Everyone sat stiff, eyes flicking between me, Vivian, and the doorway Callum had just disappeared through. Vivian remained at the head table, her flawless posture unraveling, as if she'd just been struck. Her shoulders slumped beneath the weight of what had just unfolded. She glanced around, but the faces staring back no longer carried smiles. Some were stunned, others looked ashamed, and a few wore anger. Not at Callum, but directed at her. Judith broke the silence first. She pushed herself up so fast the chair screeched against the polished floor. "What an ungrateful boy," she barked. "He humiliated you in front of everyone. Just like your sister, always selfish." But her words didn't carry their usual sting. The authority she once held over the room was gone, and her voice fell hollow. I stayed quiet. I didn't need to answer. For the first time ever, I didn't feel myself shrinking beneath her tone. Instead, I turned toward Luca. He looked up, uncertain. "Are we leaving?" he whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, brushing his hair back gently. "We're going home." I rose with my head high, took his hand, and walked toward the exit. People stepped aside as we passed. Some avoided meeting my gaze. Others seemed like they wanted to speak but couldn't form the words. Halfway to the door, someone called my name. "Era." I turned. It was my grandfather, Norman. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed with red. Slowly he stood and moved toward me. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice unsteady. "I should have stopped this years ago." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. I didn't resent him for never stepping in. I knew too well what silence can cost a person. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't carrying their guilt anymore either. Outside, the evening air was sharp and cool. Luca tightened his grip on my hand. "Is the wedding over?" he asked. I looked down at him and smiled. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think it ended exactly how it was supposed to." We drove home in quiet. The radio stayed off. The only sounds were the steady hum of the tires and Luca's fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. That night, I tucked him in, kissed his forehead, and lingered at his doorway longer than usual. He didn't ask anything else. He didn't need to. By morning, my phone showed a dozen missed calls. Unknown numbers, distant relatives, even a couple of guests I barely remembered. I ignored them all. Then another buzz. A text from a friend who'd been at the wedding. Someone recorded Callum's speech. "It's on Facebook. Over 50,000 views already. You need to read the comments. People are standing up for you." I opened the video. There was Callum's voice, steady, unshaken, defying an entire room. And there I was beside him, frozen in the frame, Luca's small hand in mine. The comments overflowed with support. "This man is a hero. She deserves better. I'm crying watching this. Every single mom out there just got a little justice." I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I felt something loosen inside me. Something that had been clenched for years finally released. That week, Vivian tried to twist the story. She insisted Callum had blown things out of proportion, that it was only a joke, that people were overly sensitive. But the truth was already out, and the laughter had stopped. A few days later, a small bouquet of wildflowers appeared at my door. No message, just a tiny card with the words, "To the lioness." I didn't need to wonder who had sent it. The wedding never took place. But something far more meaningful did. For once, I wasn't the one left carrying the shame. I wasn't the one forced to say sorry. I walked out of that room with my son by my side, with dignity intact, and my head held high. And somewhere, someone had reminded a room full of people, and maybe the entire internet, what real strength looks like. 6 months have passed since the wedding that never was. Vivian and Callum ended their engagement quietly. No public statements, no spectacle, no dramatic posts, just a silent erasure of what was supposed to be their flawless day. Vivian slipped back into her social circle as though nothing had happened. The photos from that night vanished from her feed. She never contacted me. I can't say I expected her to. Judith called once. Not to apologize, but to tell me I had humiliated the family by refusing to laugh along. I listened for 30 seconds before saying something I never thought I'd have the courage to say. "I'm not your scapegoat anymore." Then I hung up. It wasn't said in anger. It wasn't a dramatic scene. It was clean, quiet, final. That's when I realized I didn't need some grand apology from my family. I didn't need them to suddenly change or acknowledge my worth. What I needed was to stop waiting for their permission to see it for myself. Life didn't magically change overnight. I still work long hours. Some nights, I still cook 2 separate dinners because Luca wants pancakes while I crave something with greens. But the difference is in how I carry myself. I'm no longer weighed down by years of silent shame. I don't shrink into the background anymore. And Luca, he's different too. He's full of questions now, sharp ones. He asks why some people choose cruelty and why others show courage. To him, Callum is like a Marvel superhero. Sometimes he lines up his action figures and pretends they're giving speeches, standing up for the underdog. I watch him, and I know deep in my bones that what he witnessed that night will shape the man he grows up to be. Strong yet tender, never afraid to speak when it truly mattered. One evening, as we were brushing our teeth, Luca glanced at me through the mirror and asked, "Mom, are you still upset about what Aunt Vivian said?" I hesitated for a second before answering. "Not anymore." "Why do you ask?" He gave a little shrug, toothpaste smeared across his chin, and said, "Because I think you won, even though it wasn't a fight." His words lingered with me. He was right. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't thrown insults. I didn't demand fairness, break down in public, or cause a scene. I simply rose, took my son's hand, and walked out. And then, unexpectedly, someone else decided silence wasn't enough. Callum didn't just defend me. He reminded everyone in that room what love truly looks like. Not the kind dressed in a tuxedo or marching down the aisle, but the kind that sees someone being hurt and declares, "Not today." If there's one lesson I've carried with me, it's this. Being on your own doesn't mean you're unwanted. Choosing kindness doesn't mean you're weak. And once you reclaim your dignity, no one can ever strip it away again. So no, I didn't dance at my sister's wedding. I didn't raise a glass, toss a bouquet, or shed joyful tears under twinkling lights. But I walked away with something far more valuable than acceptance. I left with my head held high, my son at my side, and a calm certainty that I no longer owed anyone an explanation. That was the ending nobody anticipated, and the one I truly deserved. If this story touched you, if you've ever been made to feel small or silenced in a room where others should have defended you, remember this. Your voice matters, your dignity matters, and you are never alone. If this story gave you strength, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let me know. Have you ever had a moment where someone finally stood up for you? Or where you had to stand up for yourself? And if you'd like more true stories that cut deep, break expectations, and remind us what it means to be human, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss what's next. Thank you for listening.